He thought he knew everything about the woman he married. For 3 years, Michael Turner, a self-made millionaire worth over $600 million, believed his wife, Isabella, was flawless. Elegant, charming, and admired at every event. She carried herself like the perfect partner. But one evening, when Michael came home earlier than expected, the truth shattered that illusion. Inside the walls of his own mansion, he discovered a horrifying scene. A 9-year-old girl, crying in the corner, her tiny body bruised and trembling. The girl was Naomi, the daughter of the family's housekeeper, and the person standing over her wasn't a stranger. It was Isabella. What Michael uncovered that night would not only expose his wife's darkest secrets, but also spark outrage that echoed far beyond his home. The question is, what would you do if the mask of someone you trusted suddenly fell? Michael Turner was the kind of man whose life seemed carefully designed for success. At 37, he had climbed from modest beginnings into a world of private jets, magazine covers, and speaking invitations at global conferences. The boy who once worked nights at a diner to pay for college had become a millionaire tech entrepreneur worth over $600 million. His story was told as inspiration. Discipline, innovation, and relentless focus had lifted him to the top. Despite his wealth, Michael still carried the habits of a man who remembered every step of the climb. He woke early, valued structure, and often preferred quiet evenings at home over parties. His mansion in Pacific Heights was designed for calm and order. Glass walls opening to a panoramic view of the bay, carefully arranged art pieces, and a kitchen where Rosa, the housekeeper, kept everything spotless. For Michael, the house was more than a display of wealth. It was a sanctuary he always trusted to feel safe. And yet, within those walls, another story had been unfolding, one he had not yet seen. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. Isabella, his wife of 3 years, was admired everywhere they went. At charity galas, she sparkled in designer gowns, her laughter polished, her hand resting gracefully on his arm. She moved easily through exclusive social clubs, always the first to greet new donors, always the one who appeared to lift the room with charm. Together, they were photographed, admired, and envied. People described them as the couple who had it all. Isabella reinforced that image at home. She reminded Michael's friends how hard he worked, often joking about his late nights on calls with investors. She presented herself as the supportive wife who managed their home so he could focus on building empires. Her performance in public was flawless, so consistent that Michael never imagined it could be anything but genuine. But every perfect image carries shadows. Rosa had been in Michael's life longer than Isabella. She had started working for him when his company first hit its stride. She was steady, quiet, and unfailingly respectful. Her 9-year-old daughter Naomi often spent afternoons in the mansion after school, usually tucked in a corner with crayons or a book. To Michael, they were more than employees. He trusted them, cared for them in the quiet way of someone who believed loyalty should be rewarded. He would never have guessed they had reason to feel unsafe in his home. There had been signs, small ones he had dismissed. Rosa sometimes seemed tense when Isabella entered the room, her shoulders drawing in as if bracing for something. Naomi's giggles would vanish when Isabella walked by, replaced by silence and lowered eyes. Michael noticed these things in passing, but explained them away. Perhaps Naomi was shy. Perhaps Rosa was overly formal. He never stopped to question further. His attention was always split between boardrooms, strategies, and the next expansion plan. He didn't realize that silence can sometimes hide pain. That afternoon, Michael was in a downtown high-rise, leading a strategy session. It was the kind of meeting that usually stretched late into the night, but on this day it ended earlier than expected. He gathered his notes, checked his watch, and for once allowed himself the thought of an unhurried evening. He imagined a glass of wine with Isabella, a calm dinner, maybe even discussing their weekend getaway. Driving back toward the mansion, he felt lighter than usual. He had no idea what awaited him at home. The house looked peaceful as he pulled into the driveway. The hedges were perfectly trimmed. The soft glow of garden lights lined the path, and the fountain trickled steadily in the courtyard. Everything in view suggested calm. He stepped inside, expecting the familiar rhythm, the smell of dinner being prepared, the hum of quiet music in the background, Isabella greeting him with practiced elegance. Instead, there was a tension in the air. Michael set his briefcase down and paused. Somewhere deeper inside the house, he heard a sound, sharp, angry, and unfamiliar. It wasn't the polished laughter he was used to hearing from Isabella. It was louder, harsher, filled with an edge he had never encountered before. He frowned, his steps slowing as he moved toward the noise. This was the moment when the life he thought he knew began to fracture. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't appear as grand acts. It begins in whispers, in hidden moments, in things overlooked. And when the mask finally slips, the truth can be far darker than imagined. Michael had built his fortune on vision, on seeing possibilities before others did. Yet in his own home he had been blind. What he was about to see would not only force him to question his wife, but also the silence he had allowed himself to accept. As he crossed the marble hallway, the voices grew clearer. He could hear a child's cry, sharp and stifled, mixed with the cold command of someone asserting power. The perfect sanctuary he believed in was about to reveal its hidden cracks. And when he stepped into that room, Michael Turner's life, and the reputation of the woman he thought he knew, would never be the same again. Michael followed the sound down the hallway, each step tightening the knot in his stomach. The mansion's marble floors echoed beneath his shoes, but nothing could drown out the sharp voice rising ahead. When he finally reached the living room, the sight before him made him freeze. Naomi was crouched in the corner, her small frame shaking, tears streaking her cheeks. A bruise darkened her knee. Hovering above her, Isabella's face twisted with fury, her foot just pulling back from another vicious kick. In her hand lay the shattered remains of a crystal bowl, shards glinting against the floor. "You broke it," Isabella snapped, her words dripping venom. "Do you know this costs more than your mother could earn in 2 years?" Michael's breath caught. For years, he had seen Isabella as graceful, refined. Yet here she was, unrecognizable, lashing out at a child. Naomi whimpered, clutching her knee. The innocence of her trembling form made the cruelty unbearable. Michael wanted to rush forward, but shock rooted him in place. He had never seen this side of Isabella. Not once. The elegant socialite who dazzled charity boards was gone, replaced by a woman consumed with rage. When Naomi finally spoke, her voice was faint. She admitted that this was not the first time. Isabella had bullied her many times when Rosa was away. She whispered that Isabella often said she should remember her place, reminding her that children like her would never have the same chances as rich white kids. Michael felt his chest tighten. Each word cut deeper, shattering the illusion of the life he thought he knew. His wife, the woman admired by everyone, was tormenting a child in his own home. Moments later, Rosa returned from running errands. Naomi immediately ran to her, clinging to her mother with a desperation that said more than words ever could. Rosa's eyes flicked nervously to Isabella, then down to the floor. She was terrified, too afraid to speak. Michael didn't miss the tension in Rosa's posture, the way her hands trembled as she stroked Naomi's hair. He realized then that this wasn't new. This had been happening for far longer than he had imagined. But why hadn't Rosa said anything? The answer came in Naomi's next hesitant confession. Isabella had threatened them both. If Naomi ever revealed the truth, Isabella would fire Rosa without hesitation. She had even gone further, waving a diamond bracelet in front of the girl, promising to slip it into Rosa's bag and accuse her of theft if they dared to speak. Michael's stomach turned. The abuse wasn't just physical. It was psychological, racial, and manipulative. Isabella had trapped Rosa and Naomi in a cage of silence, wielding power over them like a weapon. And he, Michael Turner, with all his wealth and influence, had been blind to it all. But the unraveling had only begun. Later that evening, as Michael wrestled with the storm inside him, Isabella retreated to her study. Through the cracked door, he overheard her speaking on the phone with her mother. Her tone was smug, self-assured, as if the cruelty he had witnessed were nothing but routine. "Employees need to be reminded of their place," she laughed coldly. "Naomi's so scared she'll never tell anyone. People like that are easy to silence." Michael's hands shook as he held up his phone, recording everything. He had never felt more betrayed or more determined. Then came a chilling twist. Isabella spoke of a plan B. If Michael ever turned against her, she claimed, she had 3 years of carefully gathered evidence to accuse him of emotional abuse and walk away with half his fortune. Her voice was filled with arrogance, convinced she was untouchable. What she didn't know was that Michael wasn't just recording her. He was streaming the call live to his LinkedIn network, where thousands of business leaders, colleagues, and influencers were watching in real time. The comments exploded with outrage. Viewers couldn't believe what they were hearing. Isabella wasn't just cruel. She was calculated, manipulative, and racist. By the time Michael walked into the room holding the tablet, Isabella's confidence wavered. He turned the screen toward her. Over 8,000 people were watching. Among them were leaders of the Silvergate Foundation, directors of the Pacific Heights Business Club, and trustees of several charities she once used to elevate her image. Her face drained of color. In the span of minutes, her carefully constructed social reputation had begun to collapse. Emails poured in announcing her suspension from prestigious boards, cancellations of memberships, and the withdrawal of her name from charitable causes. The woman who lived for appearances was watching her world unravel before her eyes. And yet, this was only the beginning, because standing quietly in the doorway were Rosa and Naomi, finally witnessing the mask fall. Michael knew the battle wasn't over. Public disgrace was one thing, but the years of abuse, the psychological torment, and the racial cruelty could not go unanswered. As Isabella stood frozen, Michael made his decision. It was time to bring in someone who could ensure justice was not just spoken about but carried out. He reached for his phone once more, calling Sofia Alvarez, a civil rights lawyer and longtime friend. Private investigators were already on their way. Isabella had built her world on lies and intimidation, but now, every word she had spoken would become the evidence that destroyed her. And as Naomi leaned against her mother, whispering that maybe they were finally safe, Michael realized something profound. The fight for justice had only just begun. But what would justice truly look like? For Rosa, for Naomi, and for the man who had discovered the truth far too late. Isabella had always believed her world was untouchable. For years, she had hidden cruelty behind flawless manners, wielding charm at dinners while striking fear in private. But now, her performance had collapsed in real time. The room where she once commanded respect had turned into a stage for her downfall, and the audience was far larger than she ever imagined. Michael stood before her, holding the tablet that displayed thousands of furious comments scrolling across the screen. Words like disgusting, racist, and predator filled the chat. Business leaders she once bragged about knowing were condemning her publicly. Donors and club directors were cutting ties, one after another. Her reputation, the polished image she had clung to, was unraveling second by second. Still, Isabella tried to fight. She straightened her shoulders, forcing a smirk. "They'll forget in a week. People always do. I'm the victim here, Michael. And when I file, you'll lose half of everything." But her voice cracked on the last word. The mask was slipping, and she knew it. At that moment, Sofia Alvarez, the civil rights lawyer Michael had called, arrived with 2 investigators. Their presence turned the living room into a courtroom. Papers rustled as Sofia began listing the charges that could be filed. Racial discrimination, emotional abuse, threats of false accusations, and fraud. Each word landed like a hammer, shattering Isabella's last defense. Naomi clung tightly to Rosa in the doorway, eyes wide. For the first time, the girl wasn't just trembling in fear. She was watching her tormentor exposed in front of everyone. Rosa's hands shook as she held her daughter close, torn between relief and disbelief. Years of silence had finally been broken, but the weight of what they had endured pressed heavily in the air. Michael's own emotions raged beneath his calm exterior. He felt guilt for not seeing sooner, for overlooking the subtle signs, for allowing his obsession with business to blind him in his own home. But stronger than guilt was resolve. He would not let silence protect cruelty again. Then, Isabella made a desperate move. She reached for the bracelet she had once threatened to plant in Rosa's bag. Holding it up, she spat. "Who do you think they'll believe? Me or a maid?" The words hung in the air like poison. It was the moment everything crystallized. The mask of sophistication was gone. Isabella was no longer the elegant socialite. She was exposed as a woman who thrived on intimidation, who saw power only in terms of skin color and status. And at that exact second, Naomi, the child who had been silenced for so long, stepped forward. Her voice was small, but it carried more weight than anything Isabella had ever said. "Bullies only seem strong until someone sees what they're doing." The words pierced the silence. Rosa gasped softly, tears spilling down her cheeks. Sophia's eyes softened, and Michael felt a rush of pride and sorrow all at once. The truth wasn't coming from lawyers or screens. It was coming from the 9-year-old who had suffered the most. For Isabella, the words were a dagger. She faltered, her hand shaking, the bracelet slipping from her grip and clattering to the floor. No amount of denial could erase the evidence, the recordings, the live stream, or the child's courage. Her empire of lies had collapsed. Emails continued to flood in, her suspension from the Silvergate Foundation confirmed, her removal from the Pacific Heights Business Club finalized, her charitable board memberships revoked. Every door she had once used to climb higher was slamming shut. But the most crushing blow wasn't professional. It was personal. Michael no longer looked at her with shock or anger. He looked at her with absolute clarity, as if seeing her for the first time. The woman he thought he loved had never truly existed. The investigators began gathering evidence, photographing the shattered crystal bowl, documenting Naomi's bruise, and collecting the recordings. Sophia read aloud the potential legal consequences, each one painting Isabella further into a corner she could no longer escape. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone. Rosa trembled as she finally allowed herself to breathe. Naomi's small hand gripped her mother's tightly, but her eyes stayed fixed on Isabella, no longer in fear, but in defiance. Michael's mind swirled with emotions. Rage at the cruelty, sorrow for the silence, but above all, determination. His life, his home, his marriage had been built on an illusion. But illusions could not stand against truth. Isabella sank into a chair, her face pale, her body trembling. The walls of power she had used to cage others had become her own prison. For the first time, she was the one cornered, stripped of control. The climax of years of cruelty had come crashing down in a single night. And as silence filled the room, broken only by the soft sobs of Rosa and Naomi, the weight of justice hovered, waiting to fall. The story was far from over. Legal battles loomed. Emotional scars remained. And the question lingered, heavy in the air. Would justice be enough to heal what had been broken? Because while Isabella's fall was complete, the journey for Rosa, Naomi, and Michael was only just beginning. The days that followed were anything but quiet. News of Isabella's cruelty spread like wildfire once Michael exposed the truth. Neighbors who once admired her now whispered in disgust. Social circles that had praised her elegance turned their backs. And while Michael could have easily swept the entire incident under the rug to protect his reputation, he chose a different path. He stood publicly by Naomi and her mother, making sure the world knew what had happened within his own home. For Naomi, the scars of that night ran deeper than the bruises on her small arms. She had felt the weight of being powerless, targeted not because of who she was, but because of the color of her skin and her family's place in the household. Yet she also felt something else: validation. For the first time, someone with power had stepped in and said, "This is not acceptable." Michael did not just dismiss Isabella. He filed for divorce, ensuring she faced the full consequences of her actions. Legal charges followed, and the story made headlines, opening conversations across the city about hidden racism in wealthy homes and workplaces. What had been a private act of cruelty was now a public wake-up call. But perhaps the most powerful impact was seen in Naomi. With Michael's support, her mother was given better opportunities and a platform to speak out. They no longer felt like shadows working in someone else's mansion. They felt seen. Naomi began to heal, knowing that her pain had not been ignored and that her dignity mattered. For Michael, the experience shattered his comfortable illusions. He had always believed racism was something distant, something ugly that happened out there. But it had been in his own home, carried out by the person he trusted most. He learned that silence in the face of cruelty is complicity, and he vowed never to stand silent again. His wealth could no longer shield him from uncomfortable truths. It had to be used to confront them. This story is not just about one child, one man, or one family. It is about the way prejudice hides behind closed doors, disguised in polite smiles and perfect appearances. It is about how quickly admiration can turn into disgust when the mask slips and the truth is revealed. And most importantly, it is about the choices we face when confronted with injustice. Do we look away, or do we act? Think about Naomi for a moment. Imagine being 9 years old, standing alone in a mansion filled with wealth, yet feeling smaller than ever. Imagine knowing your only crime was being born into the wrong skin color in the wrong place. And then imagine the difference it makes when one person refuses to let that stand. Racism doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the way people treat others when no one is watching. Sometimes it hides in the corners of privilege, waiting for silence to protect it. But silence can no longer be an option. As Naomi's story reminds us, change begins when even one person dares to say, "Enough." And the question now falls to you. If you saw injustice happening before your eyes, would you have the strength to act, or would you walk away? If the story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it, talk about it, and reflect on it. Because every time we bring light to these hidden truths, we take one step closer to a world where no child has to fear cruelty simply for existing. Naomi's story is a powerful reminder that injustice can hide in plain sight, even behind the walls of wealth and privilege. Michael's choice to act instead of staying silent changed everything for a little girl who had almost lost her voice. But the real question is, what would you have done in his place? If this story made you think, share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that reveal hidden truths.